Did the CIA use children as spies? In the long shadow of the Cold War, when empires watched each other through trembling curtains of fear, rumors drifted across borders like silent smoke. Speaking of secrets too unsettling to record officially, historians would later agree that truth often hid behind the smallest movements in divided cities. Yet few could explain why intelligence files mention witnesses barely old enough to tie their shoes. At the height of this ideological storm, the world's most powerful agencies were trapped in a race, a competition where every fragment of information was priceless and every unexpected source mattered. Among the dim corridors of clandestine offices, a question began circulating in nervous whispers, a question dismissed publicly, yet never forgotten privately. Could children become unnoticed spies? No report dared to say yes aloud, but fragments of testimony suggested an unsettling possibility, the idea that innocence itself might have been manipulated, shaped into a tool none suspected existed. From the rubble of post-war Europe came stories of small messengers crossing checkpoints unchallenged, carrying folded notes tucked in pockets, unaware of the political weight resting in their tiny hands. In the Middle East, diplomats recalled seeing barefoot children wander through military districts freely, their presence so common that soldiers seldom looked twice, granting them unspoken access to secrets. Across Latin America, local journalists uncovered tales of minors recruited as watchers and listeners, guided by adults they trusted, only learning years later that they were part of a shadowed network. The Central Intelligence Agency denied every accusation, insisting national ethics forbade such acts. Yet the absence of proof was matched by the presence of too many unanswered questions to ignore. By the early years of the Cold War, strange details emerged in congressional briefings held behind doors, briefings that referred vaguely to youthful assets, a phrase as chilling as it was deliberately vague. Some intelligence officers later admitted that the era blurred moral boundaries with frightening ease, suggesting that desperation had often pushed decision-makers into realms they claimed never to enter. Still, as historians sifted through redacted files, patterns emerged that pointed to an unsettling truth, a truth that could not be proven outright, but also refused to disappear, no matter how tightly sealed. For decades, the most secret agencies of the world insisted the rumors were nothing but dark propaganda, yet the whispers continued, slipping through archives, interviews, memoirs, and unresolved testimonies. And as the Cold War deepened, those whispers grew louder, shaping a mystery buried beneath official silence, a mystery asking the world to face a question too disturbing for any government to answer openly. If innocence is the perfect cover, what stops a desperate intelligence service from exploiting it? Thus begins the search into one of the most troubling shadows of modern espionage, where truth and denial stand side by side, and no one agrees which one is real. In the divided heart of Berlin, where concrete walls carve families apart, daily life became a theater of surveillance, and even the simplest moments were observed by eyes trained to measure every detail. Children often wandered freely between sectors, slipping through alleys too narrow for patrol vehicles, their laughter echoing across barriers meant to separate nations rather than silence innocent play. Western operatives noticed early that no soldier ever halted a passing child carrying a satchel or toy, for the idea of a young messenger seemed too absurd, too morally jarring for any guard to consider. Yet scattered Soviet reports describe youngsters sketching buildings or counting patrol rotations, activities dismissed as childlike curiosity, though the timing of their appearance raised suspicions. In quiet cafes near Checkpoint Charlie, intelligence officers from rival blocks watched these small figures, each uncertain whether they witnessed harmless errands or movements rehearsed by unseen instructors. Some declassified memos hinted at brief attempts to recruit minors not through coercion, but through gifts, offering sweets, coins, or stories of heroism to shape their willingness to observe what adults could not. Historians later debated whether such exchanges constituted manipulation or merely opportunistic chance, for no official directive confirmed a program, yet field notes implied a strategic pattern repeating. The Cold War was a battlefield of subtleties, a place where information outweighed bullets and victories, and the smallest unnoticed observer could alter the balance between peace, panic, and political collapse. In Eastern Europe, Investigators uncovered testimonies from grown adults recalling their strange childhoods. When they were asked to deliver envelopes to strangers or memorize the colors of vehicles at checkpoints. These recollections were fragmented, unclear, shaped by the haze of time and the innocence of youth. Yet together they formed a mosaic suggesting that children had indeed brushed close to espionage. No agency, American, Soviet, or otherwise, ever acknowledged such practices, claiming strict boundaries existed, but misdirection was a currency of intelligence work, and moral assurances often hid darker realities. Documents from Latin American conflicts describe youth sources positioned near diplomatic compounds, a term carefully crafted to avoid explicit admission while revealing the dependency on unassuming eyes. Even in Southeast Asia, wartime archives mention adolescent guides familiar with terrain and troop habits, guides praised for their fearlessness, though rarely told the true consequences of the details they shared. As the Cold War escalated, so did the desperation of nations competing for control of global narratives, and the line between strategic necessity and ethical collapse grew thinner with each passing operation. By the late decades of the conflict, rumors evolved into testimonies and testimonies into historical puzzles, yet every attempt to confirm the truth met a wall of denial, redaction, or sudden disappearance of records. Still, the pattern persisted, stories from multiple continents echoing the same unsettling rhythm, a rhythm suggesting that innocence had been observed, approached, and in some cases recruited. And as these shadows lengthened across history's pages, one chilling question remained unresolved, a question that haunted anyone brave enough to study the darker corners of espionage. When the Cold War entered its most fragile years, government vaults began swallowing documents whole, yet a handful of misplaced files survived the purge, revealing details too strange to ignore quietly. Among these forgotten papers were field notes from Southeast Asia describing youth informants, a phrase carefully engineered to conceal its meaning while hinting at operations buried beneath secrecy. The notes claimed these miners offered directions through dense villages and mapped patrol routines, their small presence attracting no suspicion, allowing them to witness what soldiers often overlooked. In another set of redacted reports from Latin America, officers wrote about untrained juvenile observers, children who wandered near embassies or military checkpoints, unintentionally gathering crucial details. One memo described a boy who spent afternoons selling fruit outside a diplomatic compound's metal gate, yet the timing of his appearances matched every major meeting held inside, raising unspoken questions. Historians analyzing these files noticed a pattern of cautious language repeating across continents, as if intelligence officers feared writing the truth plainly, choosing vague terms as ethical shields. Even more unsettling were transcripts from old interviews with retired operatives who spoke reluctantly, men who admitted that desperation sometimes forced them to consider sources they would never defend publicly. One former analyst recalled hearing of miners tasked with counting vehicles or noting guard rotations. Their reports filtered through adults, so the children never understood the significance of their actions. Though he insisted the Central Intelligence Agency never sanctioned such methods formally or openly, he also confessed that the era rewarded results more than principles, and oversight often arrived too late. Across Europe, whispers about child couriers emerged in debriefings conducted after border incidents, stories of adolescents seen slipping messages into pockets or delivering coded items wrapped as toys. None of these accounts proved intentional recruitment, yet none fully disproved it either, leaving historians trapped between fragments of testimony and governments unmoved by the allegations. The most haunting discovery came from a near-forgotten archive in the Middle East, sealed for decades, containing sketches drawn by a young girl who had wandered freely through a restricted military zone. Her drawings captured positions of watchtowers, vehicle paths, and supply storage areas with eerie accuracy, details too precise to dismiss as coincidence, though no one ever identified who asked her to observe them. Researchers argued she may have simply been perceptive, a child absorbing the world with innocent clarity, but skeptics countered that such clarity aligned too neatly with intelligence priorities of that time. Within these archives, one report mentioned an operative reprimanded for involvement with minors, a phrase left unexplained, suspended between moral suspicion and bureaucratic understatement. The deeper historians searched, the more they sensed a deliberate fog surrounding the subject, a fog thicker than normal redactions, as if the truth had been buried not to hide wrongdoing alone, but to preserve a narrative of moral superiority long essential to national identity. Even after decades passed, the discovered fragments refused to merge into a single undeniable answer. Yet together they formed a silhouette unmistakable in shape, though blurred in its final contours. A silhouette suggesting that innocence may have stood closer to espionage than any agency would admit, and that some records survived only because those who buried them could not erase every shadow. As scholars continued to unearth these scattered traces, a troubling realization settled upon them. A realization that history's darkest truths rarely appear in full, they bleed through the margins first. And in those margins, one disturbing possibility lingered like a ghost refusing to be written away. If these archives survived by accident, how many others vanished because they revealed too much? When the Cold War finally loosened its grip, former operatives emerged from silence with trembling voices, revealing memories they had buried beneath decades of loyalty, fear, and the heavy weight of duty unspoken. Journalists traveled across continents seeking answers, interviewing men and women now aged by regret, and each confession carried the same unsettling rhythm, a mix of denial, hesitation, and haunted truth. One retired officer from Eastern Europe recalled seeing a young courier slip through guarded alleys, a boy no older than 10 summers, who delivered folded notes without knowing the storm he navigated. He insisted the Central Intelligence Agency never ordered such actions directly or explicitly, yet he admitted that field agents sometimes used whatever the environment provided, a phrase chilling in tone. Another testimony came from South America, where a woman described her childhood spent near embassies, remembering strangers who asked her simple questions about schedules, uniforms, or passing vehicles. She had thought them friendly tourists then, unaware that her answers fed into reports marked classified, a realization that struck her only in adulthood when she saw the same symbols in declassified archives. In the Middle East, a former interpreter told of children who wandered freely into military districts, their presence so ordinary that guards never questioned their eyes or the small drawings they carried. He recalled hearing whispers among operatives that a child sees everything adults forget to notice, a sentiment that revealed both the temptation and the terror of exploiting innocence for intelligence. Ethicists later argued that such testimonies blurred the line between manipulation and unintended use, but survivors insisted that childhood memories became weapons the moment adults shaped them purposefully. Congressional hearings in the late Cold War years addressed these suspicions only in cautious language, referring to methods incompatible with democratic values, a phrase that hid more than it revealed. Documents from those hearings showed internal conflict between moral principle and national security, with some officials demanding accountability, while others urged silence to avoid diplomatic fallout. Historians examining these debates sense the weight of truths that officials refuse to articulate, as though acknowledging them openly would fracture the delicate myth of ethical superiority long upheld. Meanwhile, psychological studies tracked individuals who believed their youth had been quietly exploited, revealing trauma that lingered not from missions performed, but from trust betrayed before it was understood. These testimonies formed a chorus too fractured to confirm, yet too consistent to dismiss entirely, a chorus echoing through archives, memoirs, and late-night interviews where truth slipped past caution. Every story differed in detail, but all shared one unshakable theme. The innocence of childhood had brushed against machinery built for conflict, leaving marks visible only in the rear view of history. And as these voices emerged from forgotten corners of the world, a deeper question took shape, a question that pierced the official narratives and settled into the collective conscience of researchers. If so many remember being used, why do the agencies they accuse remember nothing at all? The final years of the Cold War brought storms that few could read, yet the agency pressed forward, guided by whispers carved in fear. Across dim corridors, analysts traced patterns no machine could trace, believing human intuition still held keys hidden from ruthless rivals. Files were sealed, experiments halted, and budgets quietly redirected, but the shadows of the psychic project clung to the walls like frost. Some officers insisted that a handful of results defied explanation, speaking of minds touching distant places with uncanny precision. Others dismissed every claim as coincidence wrapped in ambition, a relic of desperate decades when nations hunted impossible power. Yet the truth refused to die, carried by veterans with trembling voices, Men who remembered locked rooms, humming machines, and unseen forces. They spoke of nights when subjects described sealed documents exactly, and mornings when predictions matched events down to a chilling detail. Official reports buried such moments beneath layers of skepticism, though scattered memos hinted at outcomes too precise to ignore. By the late 1980s, the project had become a forbidden echo, a name uttered only by those who lived through its uneasy creation. Still, deep inside archival vaults, a few pages escaped the censors, bearing diagrams, coordinates, and testimonies written in shaking ink. Some claim these fragments proved nothing, mere noise without pattern, while others believed they mapped a frontier carved by the human mind. When the program was finally shuttered, no ceremony marked its end, only silent locks turning as another secret slipped into obscurity. Yet rumors spread that certain techniques were never fully abandoned, quietly transferred to compartments known only to select operatives. A retired officer once hinted that gifted individuals were monitored, not trained, nor exploited, simply observed for reasons left unsaid. He offered no details, only a question whispered with weary certainty, asking whether the greatest threat was power itself or belief in it. Today, the agency insists the psychic chapter has long been closed, filed beside other curiosities born from fear, ambition, and illusion. But the truth carries a different weight for those who touched its edge, for they claim the mind reaches farther than science dares to admit. Perhaps the experiments were folly born of paranoia's relentless tide, or perhaps they opened a door humanity was never meant to enter. In the end, the story remains suspended between fact and forgotten myth, a monument to a time when nations gambled on forces beyond reason. And somewhere, in a vault no map reveals, a final report lies waiting, locked beneath codes and silence, holding answers no one will claim. Whether it proves triumph or delusion may never be fully known, for some secrets thrive in darkness, surviving because they are feared. And so the tale of the agency's psychic pursuit closes in uncertainty, leaving us with a single haunting truth. Some doors, once opened, echo forever.